As yet, the new explanation is incomplete. So far, the researchers have only computed the effects caused by one property of matter falling into a black hole, its electric charge. They've not shown the effect of its mass, which would also be important. Their calculations therefore account only for part of the information that is lost, but they've established a principle that may lead to a full accounting of the matter. That would let physicists sleep easy in their beds, in the knowledge that reality is once again behaving, at least approximately, how they think it ought to. How to look after all these elderly folks is a different problem. Governments around the world are already struggling to support growing numbers of retired people who depend on a shrinking working population. 18 OECD countries have raised pension ages. At the same time, workers are being asked to dig deeper into their own pockets. None of this is enough. In this method, a laser is used to create a line of ionization by removing electrons from atoms. This laser is then directed at storm clouds in order to control electrical charges, a method which is less dangerous than using rockets. As protection for the lasers, the beams are aimed firstly at mirrors.
In Italy, some of these cities were able to gain control of the surrounding country and to become city-states, resembling those of the ancient Greeks. Their autonomy was assisted by the continuing struggle between popes and emperors, between church and state. Again, a thoroughly unique Western experience. In these states, the modern world began to take form. Although the people were mainly Christians, their life and outlook became increasingly secular. Here, and not only in Italy, but in other cities north of the Alps, arose a worldview that celebrated the greatness and dignity of mankind, which was a very sharp turning away from the medieval Western tradition that put God and life in the hereafter at the center of everything.
The next topic is going to be black holes, and this is a similar situation. 15, 20 years ago, black holes were sort of poised precariously on the boundary between theoretical physics and science fiction, a boundary that is more porous than you might believe. But again, in the past 15 years or so, this has been converted into a standard topic in observational astronomy. There are dozens, probably hundreds of objects we can point to in the sky and say, yes, those things are black holes. And so now the current topic of research is, do these things that we are pretty sure are black holes actually behave in the incredibly bizarre science fiction-y manner that the theoretical physicists have been talking about for the past 30 or 40 years? And so to what extent are these very exotic behaviors actually manifested in real life?
In 1962, an English political scientist and journalist by the name of Bernard Crick wrote a short and very polemical and influential little book called In Defense of Politics. And by politics, Crick meant a distinctive type of human activity where conflicts of interests among groups are adjudicated by discussion, persuasion, and debate rather than by force or by fraud.
Now, the emergence of tropical medicine marked a transition, a transformation from something that had preceded it and that I hope won't be confusing. But from the middle of the 18th century, more or less, until the closing decade of the 19th century, there had been an older tradition that can be summarized under the label of diseases of the tropics. And there were a couple classic statements of this older tradition. One was an important work by James Lind, an 18th century physician, who wrote an essay in diseases incidental to Europeans in hot climates. And this was built on the experience of Europeans in the West Indies. And then there was another work by James Johnson called The Influence of Tropical Climates on European Constitutions, built on the experience of Europeans in India.
To biomedical researchers all over the world, twins offer a precious opportunity to untangle the influence of genes and environment, of nature and nurture. Because identical twins come from a single fertilized egg that splits into two, they share virtually the same genetic code. Any differences between them, one twin having younger looking skin, for example, must be due to environmental factors, such as less time spent in the sun. Language often seems so skillfully drafted that one can hardly imagine it as anything other than the perfected handiwork of a master craftsman. How else could this instrument make so much out of barely 3 dozen measly morsels of sound? In themselves, these configurations of mouth, PF, BV, TD, KG, SH, A, E, and so on, amount to nothing more than a few haphazard spits and splutters, random noises with no meaning, no ability to express, no power to explain. An Egyptian narrative of about 1080 BC, the story of Wen Amen, provides an insight into the scale of their trading activity. One of the characters is Wereket El, a Phoenician merchant living at Tanis in Egypt's Nile Delta. As many as 50 ships carry out his business, plying back and forth between the Nile and the Phoenician port of Sidon. The most prosperous period for Phoenicia was the 10th century BC, when the surrounding region was stable. I'm responsible for student admissions to the college, and I use a computer system to help process student enrollments and to do the timetabling. But it doesn't really suit the way we work these days. It's over 10 years old, and although it was fine when it was first introduced, it is just not good enough now. 20 years ago, the college was quite small and we didn't have the number of students and tutors that we have now. There's a lot more data now, and it sometimes seems the system has crashed. But in fact, it just takes ages to go from one screen to the next.
There are more than 160 known species of chameleons. The main distribution is in Africa and Madagascar and other tropical regions, although some species are also found in parts of southern Europe and Asia. There are introduced populations in Hawaii and probably in California and Florida too. New species are still discovered quite frequently. Dr. Andrew Marshall, a conservationist from New York University, was surveying monkeys in Tanzania when he stumbled across a twig snake in the Mangobria forest, which, frightened, coughed up a chameleon and fled. Though a colleague persuaded him not to touch it because of the risk of venom, Marshall suspected it might be a new species. One of the drawbacks of staying with the same organization is that the person may get stuck doing the same job year after year. In some cases, this can lead to boredom and disillusionment. Moving from one organization to another can be a strategic decision in order to have a variety and acquire a range of skills and experience. The person may be incredibly knowledgeable in a range of fields by working in different organizations. Using the internet has become a normal part of everyday life for many people. They use it to book airline tickets or to access news about world events or to follow the fortunes of their favorite football club. Millions of people across the world belong to social networking groups where they keep in touch with their friends and, if they live far away from them, their family. In my opinion, these are all good ways to use the internet.
We don't have any databases on this sort of information. As well as that, these records of sound levels take no account of the fact that people vary in their perceptions of noise. So someone like me with years of working in acoustics might be very different from you in that regard. But anyway, even though these noise maps are fairly crude, they've been useful in providing information and raising awareness that noise matters. We need to deal with it, and so it's a political matter. And that's important. We need rules and regulations because noise can cause all sorts of problems. Those of you who are city dwellers know that things go on 24 hours a day.
But the problem is that the amount of mercury in the environment's increasing. The main reason for this is the power plants used to produce electricity. The main source of energy that most of them use is still coal, and when it's burned, it releases mercury into the atmosphere. Some of this gets deposited into lakes and rivers, and if it's ingested by a fish, it's not excreted. It stays in the fish's body, and it enters the food chain. So, it's been known for some time that birds which eat fish may be affected. But what wasn't known until quite recently is that those that eat insects can also be affected.
As with all human behaviour, there are numerous reasons for it, but often it's caused by someone who feels the need to show their superiority over someone else, in order to feel that they aren't at the lowest level in a hierarchy or a group of people. In some cases, one person simply dislikes the other, on the basis that the personality of one is in some way incompatible with that of the other person.
The other teams tried to collaborate on building the structure and descended into confusion, with everyone getting in each other's way. Our team leader solved the challenge brilliantly. She simply asked everyone in the team to move a piece a few centimetres to comply with the rule, and then let the person in the team with an aptitude for puzzles like this build it alone.
Birds face many man-made mortal threats. Windows, cats, habitat destruction, even climate change. And now there's poison in their birdseed. You see, the Scott's Miracle-Gro company had been in the habit of applying banned pesticides to its wild bird food products. In particular, the company applied a chemical known as Storeside 2 to its bird food, despite a warning label for that product that reads, quote, "Storeside 2 is extremely toxic to fish and toxic to birds and other wildlife." Why add a compound toxic to birds to food meant to be eaten by birds? Because Scott didn't want bugs infesting its bird food during storage. By the time Scott stopped adding the pesticide in March 2008, the company had sold some 70 million bags of adulterated bird food. The company also submitted false documents to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, distributed pesticides with misleading labels, and distributed illegal pesticides. As a result, the EPA slapped the company with a $12.5 million in criminal fines and civil penalties. So when you put out new birdseed this winter, at least you won't be inadvertently poisoning any chirpers. Oh, and keep those cats inside, too.